Okay, my name is George, and we're going to do a talk here about railroad communications in 1864. First thing I want to do is thank a couple of people who helped out here. Without Kelly's technical assistance, this wouldn't even be happening. And I always thank Kathy Wright because she taught me how to do the PowerPoint program in the first place. So railroad communications in 1864, we're going to look at this from three different perspectives. That's going to be communications actually on the train, communications that are internal communications within the railroad, and outside communications, communications between the railroad and the outside world. Okay? Communications on the train involve hand signals or flag signals, lanterns used to prevent accidents. The engineer doesn't make decisions, he does what they're telling him to do through these signals to prevent accidents. Signals used to communicate, stop, proceed, air brake, release, back up, and slow down. This is the engineer's viewpoint. It's a little bit later engine in the 1860s, but it's close enough. This engineer, this is the front end of the train here. He's looking back to the back end of the train. It's very important to understand what his viewpoint is and what he can't see. When he looks back, this is what he's going to see. That's his viewpoint. He cannot see down here. He cannot see in between this car, behind the train, or anything on the other side whatsoever. So his viewpoint is very limited, making it extremely dangerous when you're moving large pieces of equipment around. In order to take care of that problem, we're going to, well, just like for instance, in between these cars, what could be going on back here that he doesn't know about, this guy right here is coupling, uncoupling cars. He doesn't even know about that until he gets a signal. So what he's going to do is expect this guy to step out from in between the cars once in a while and give a signal to communicate what's going to happen to try to, again, prevent accidents. So he's going to step out. He's going to use some signals here. During the daytime, he will use his hand or a flag to use these signals. He'll use exactly the same signal system at night, but he'll use a lantern because it's really dark out there. So his signals are going to be, when the train has parted, the train has already been taken apart, he will make a very large signal with the lantern. When he wants the engineer to apply air brakes, he holds it up high and goes back and forth, straight back and forth, to apply the air brakes. If he wants them to back up, he makes a little circle like this. That means to back up the train. When he wants them to release the air brakes, he'll hold it up here and just leave it. When he wants them to stop, he's going to hold it down low, like this, back and forth, hold it down low. When he wants them to proceed or go forward, he's going to go like this, straight up and down, straight up and down. That tells him to go forward. Again, all of this is a safety issue trying to prevent accidents. And this is the type of lantern they would use, whatever fuel they could find, kerosene, whale oil, whatever they had at that time, 1860s, for fuel. Internal communications, that's communications inside the railroad, are going to involve schedules, train orders, and superior and inferior trains. Superior and inferior trains are the fact that some trains have priority over others. So some of them are going to sit on a siding waiting for other trains to go by. And he'll explain that. So the train schedule, this is a fairly typical train schedule. It just tells you where they're going to be and when they're going to be. This is telling railroad employees where they're supposed to be. Now, are they always exactly on time? No. In the real world, they're not always on time. But this is what's supposed to happen. And this is from the Orange and Alexandria Railroad. We use that later on as an example. But here they are going from Gordonsville, Alexandria, and all the times they're supposed to be there. This tells the railroad employees what's supposed to happen anyway. This is a train order called a flimsy. It's a very, very thin piece of paper, almost like wax paper used to have years ago. And on this piece of paper, they're going to, again, tell the engineer what to do, where to go, when to stop, when to leave there, all that sort of thing. This is also going to delineate which trains are superior trains and inferior trains. If you're on a train and you're supposed to let someone else go by, you know to go to the passing side and let them do it. So all these communications are on the flimsy. And the way they're going to give them, physically hand it to him, is he's not even going to stop at a station. He's going to be rolling by, he's going to slow down at the station, they're going to put the flimsy on this and walk out to the track and hold this up, and he's going to grab that on the fly without even stopping. Outside communications. This is communication between the railroad and the outside world. And it involves crossing sign schedules and, of course, the telegraph. The railroad crossing sign is really low tech, but it works. What it doesn't tell you is what direction the train is coming from or what time it's going to come there, but at least if you're going down a dirt road and you're getting ready to cross a railroad crossing, it tells you that there's a potential, because the saying is anytime is train time. So watch out. Again, a train schedule, you know what that looks like. The train schedule tells, again, the outside world, people who don't work for the railroad, maybe potential passengers, when the train might be coming. Again, it could be a little off schedule, but generally, this is what time the train's going to be there, where it's going to be, and when it's going to be. Samuel Morse is going to be very involved with the Morse code. Samuel Morse is born in Massachusetts. He's going to go to Yale, and he's going to study the science of the horse, philosophy and mathematics, other things. But his real love and passion in life is art. And even though he didn't study art in school, he ends up trying to be an artist as a career. So what he's going to do is meet, fall in love with, and marry Lucretia Walker. Now, Lucretia Walker doesn't know it, but she will change the course of history. Some of his early work, most artists in that time would usually specialize in painting people, faces, or doing landscapes. Here he's doing really the Pilgrims at Plymouth Rock. He's doing people's faces, and he's doing a landscape in the background. So he's showing some versatility here. He moves in some pretty big circles. He knows some important people, like maybe presidents, like John Adams. He does a portrait of John Adams. All this work is even based out of Connecticut. He lives in Connecticut at the time. So he meets some important people and does their portraits. He does the first selfie. He does a self-portrait in 1812. This is what he thinks he looks like. And most people thought they looked better from a profile view, just the way things were back in those days. But this is a painting of himself. He goes to Europe, and he really is completely overwhelmed by the art, the quantity and quality of art at the Louvre, and he's so overwhelmed with it, he actually just does a painting of all the other paintings. It's not very clear, but it's the best I could find. But he actually does a painting of all the other paintings just to show the volume and the quality of art at the Louvre is just, some of the best in the world. He goes to Italy and does this one here, the Chapel of the Virgin at Saviaco. This really becomes an important one for him career-wise, because this is an important, critically acclaimed landscape picture that he does. It makes him quite popular in Europe. But the one that really puts him on the map is the Dying Hercules. This one, because of critical acclaim and the fame unfortunately brought him, really made Samuel Morse an important artist on a global scale, the Dying Hercules. So that was important for his career. Later on, he does another painting of his wife, Lucretia Walker, and two of their children. She eventually went on to have four children. At this stage of his life, for Samuel Morse, life is really good. He is a very, very successful artist. He's established himself as an important and successful artist on a global scale. He has a beautiful wife. He has healthy children. Things are going really well for him. He has to do two things to make a living as an artist. He has to create the artwork, which he does all by himself, and then he has to travel around to sell the artwork. What he does is, again, based out of Connecticut, he travels to Washington, D.C. in February 1825. His father lives right down the road from where they live in Connecticut, and he gets a message almost as soon as he gets there that your dear wife is convalescent. And today we would say she's sick. This is not good news. He hurries back to Connecticut best he can. By the time he gets there, she's already dead and gone. He is absolutely devastated. He never even got to say goodbye to her. This is her obituary here, the middle part of her obituary right here in the middle part. It says, in New Haven on Monday the 7th, Mrs. Morris, SFB Morris, the 26th year of her age, her death was sudden and unexpected. Her husband had just left for the city of Washington, where he called to take a portrait of General Lafayette. He had done a portrait of Lafayette, trying to sell that. Said that Mrs. Morris was much beloved by all who knew her, with only repeating the same common to many in their respective circles. She possessed in a preeminent degree all those female graces and virtues which can render an object lovely, and they were most happily combined with the graces and virtues of religion. This gave a finish to her character and influenced all her actions. Kind of flowery language, that's the way they spoke back in those days. The way he views this event, because people are born, people are die, it's going to happen. But the way he views it, the way he sees the real problem is that communication in 1825 was too slow. And he blames that on him not being able to get back in time to help her out. So this is a big turning point in his life. He is no longer inspired to paint or create anything. He changes his whole life and goes in a new direction called electromagnetism. Electromagnetism is a relatively new field in 1825. There's this vague theory out there about electricity. They know what electricity is. It's fast. It moves at the speed of light, 186,000 miles per second. And they somehow, some way, they're trying to figure out a way to harness this and communicate using electricity, because then it'll be much faster. So he dives into this completely. And in 10 years, he comes up with his own system. This is a telegraph key. And this telegraph key is what he's going to use to send and receive messages through a copper wire, which is going to transmit electricity. He develops the Morse code. The Morse code is going to go through and use dots and dashes to delineate every single letter of the alphabet. With this, like A is a dot and a dash, a B is a dash and 3 dots, and so on and so forth. At this point, you can spell out any word in the English language. He has all 26 letters there. He also has all 10 numbers, 1 to 10. So any word, any number can be transmitted through those wires using the Morse code. And this is how his system is going to work. He's got a transmission key. He's got the receiving key. They're going to go back and forth again through copper wires. But none of this can happen without electricity. Where does electricity come from? It comes from the battery. And this is a source of some issues for them. Batteries hooked up to both ends, so they need a battery to produce electricity to send and receive messages. The first battery they're going to use is going to be from William Grove. William Grove is going to be actually an attorney from Wales. He's going to go to Oxford. He's going to dabble in this new thing called electromagnetism. And William Grove is going to come up with the Grove battery, or also called the gas voltaic battery. He's going to use sulfuric acid. He's going to use hydrogen and water. Basically, it's going to create the positive and negative that you're going to need. It's going to go up to the wire, and it's going to produce electricity. And electricity is going to go through the electrons are going to go through the wire and send that message. This battery actually works. But there's one problem they find out with it. Their operators keep getting sick, and they can't figure out why. After a while, they figure out this battery is very slowly and insidiously letting off a poison gas. When they figure that out, they realize this is unacceptable. We're going to have to do something about this. So they're going to go to someone else, John Daniell. John Daniell is a professor of chemistry at King's College in England. And John Daniell is going to do a really good job of putting this all together, this Daniell battery. He's going to use a couple of chemicals, and notice the chemicals are separated, so there'll be no poison gas anymore. He uses copper sulfate. Copper sulfate is a really important compound in this world. It's used for everything. It's used in blood banking to check the specific gravity of blood. It's used in agriculture to kill weeds. It's used in a lot of things. Here it's used as part of a battery. So he uses copper sulfate, CuSO4, and he uses zinc sulfate. And he's going to have his positive and negative, cathode, anode. That's going to create the electricity come up through these, up here to the electrons are going to go down the wire, and that's going to create the electricity they need to send the signal a great distance. This battery actually works, but best of all, it's not poisoning anybody. This is what they look like. This is actually 3 sets of batteries. This is one set, another set, another set. They work, but the issue with batteries is they're extremely heavy. I know I've lifted them, I know. They're very, very heavy. And lugging them around is going to be difficult. It'll show to be an issue in the war later on. Samuel Morse does not work in a vacuum by himself. He has big-time competition, serious competition from Royal Earl House. Royal Earl House is from Vermont. He doesn't have all the education that some of the other guys have, but he does a great job of coming up with new ideas. He thinks differently than other people. He can come up with, without writing anything down on a piece of paper, he can make up an entire machine in his mind, and better than that, he can tell you how to fabricate every part of that machine without even writing it down. Later on, he will write it down to apply for a patent. Well, Royal Earl House is going to come up with the printing telegraph. And again, he has a battery, of course. He has his transmitting and receiving keys. But what's different about this one, he's going to have a paper tape that's going to roll through. And that's going to actually print off the words that they're transmitting and receiving. He comes, looks like a piano keyboard. Well, it pretty much is. And he converts this over. He puts all the letters and all the numbers of the alphabet on this keyboard. So you can type it up. They can go as much as 40 words per minute on this and do it in order. Look at this very carefully. This right here is right here. Okay, that just showed you a close-up of the part of it. So they type it in. This is where he's receiving it. This is the mechanism here that's printing this off. Now, as you can see, this is quite a bit more complex than what Sable Morse was doing. And so they do have some issues sometimes with this breaking down, a lot of parts, more moving parts, more things to break, of course. But when it does work, it works very, very well. Regardless of which system they're going to use, though, they're going to use this system on the right-of-way. This is where the telegraph is going to be. This is the railroad right-of-way. It's the track. It varies from location to location, but most places it's about 30 feet on either side of the track. Okay? Right-of-way is really crucial in understanding railroading. Railroading is based on extreme long-term thinking. They want this land on either side for a lot of reasons. They might want to put in a second track 50, 100 years from now. They want a third track. They might want a passing siding. They might want an industrial siding. A lot of things are going to happen with this land. What's also going to happen with this land is that they're going to run the telegraph poles up and down the edge of the right-of-way. It's going to be on railroad property. One strange thing about it, they view the telegraph as separate from the railroad, though. The railroad workers go to work, and they work on the railroad all month. And at the end of the month, they get a paycheck. And their wives or sweethearts know that they work for the railroad. They know they get a paycheck. What sometimes the wives didn't know is that they get a separate check every time they send or receive a telegraph. It's the same guy, same employee, but he does telegraph work. He gets a separate check for that. And some of the guys years later would confess that they kind of sort of forgot to tell her about that other check. So that was his money. So here they are building it. They're going to dig a hole and put the pole in there. They're put in all the poles. He's on top of the pole attaching the wires and all that. And he apparently is sending a message the old message way. When they get finished, it's going to be, again, right along the edge of the railroad tracks. This is the pole, and they want to make sure it's not going to fall on the ground, so they have the jury make some of these things to make sure that the wire doesn't touch the ground. But on top of the pole is what we're really concerned about. This is where the wires are going to be. The wires are copper, and copper conducts electricity really well. But when they get to the top of the pole, they want to make sure they're not going to interfere with the message. So they use insulators. Insulators are made of glass. Glass does not conduct electricity. That's why they use it. So then when you get to the top of the pole, and this is a little different shape, this is the same insulator right here and here, glass insulator, and the wire's going from one pole to another. Here it is going through here, and it's not interrupted by hitting the end of the pole. So the message should be intact going to the next pole. This is going to be a pretty big business now. There are about 50, 60 companies nationwide doing telegraph work. These are three of the biggest ones: American Telegraph Company, Western Union, which still exists, and Southwestern. By 1860, there are about 50,000 miles of telegraph wire in continental United States. And by 1861, they have a telegraph running from New York to San Francisco. That's a long way to go, and there are times when it's interrupted. It can be anything from vandalism to storms that can knock down the wires. But when the wires are up and running, you can get a message now from the East Coast to the West Coast almost instantaneously. Telegraph is going to play a big part in history in a lot of different ways. This is what happens here is there is a telegraph coming from the War Department of Washington, D.C., telling the governor of North Carolina to get your people together. We're going to squelch this rebellion. They're not totally in agreement with that in North Carolina, and this telegraph has a lot to do with North Carolina seceding from the Union because they got this message they didn't really like. So the war begins. Like every war, there's plenty of suffering for the people, suffering for the animals. They're going to use the railroad in a number of different ways. They're going to use, I don't know if you can see that, but they have a artillery they have mounted on the railroad that they're going to use during the war. So they use the railroad any way that they can. There are some big differences in the way the South and the North handled telegraph business. In the South, like they did a lot of things, they just basically farmed it out to local companies to do telegraph work. In the North, they'd like to centralize things, and so they created the U.S. Military Telegraph Company. The U.S. Military Telegraph Company was designed to do work for the northern side, of course, and they do come up with a pretty good idea. There's the idea out there that, okay, armies move around, so they want to develop something called the portable telegraph. So because armies move around, and they're not always right next to the railroad. So they have the idea they're going to have these batteries and the wires and the poles, and this wagon's going to go around. They're going to keep setting it up and taking it down, set up, take it down every time the army moves. The problem with that is that the batteries are extremely heavy. The guys get bogged down in muddy roads. It just is not going to be very feasible. So they go to something called the magneto. And anyone who's ever had a motorcycle knows what a magneto is. It can start the engine. And it's a very, very small spark. And the magneto can only send the message about 100 yards, way too short. So in the end, the portable telegraph ended up being basically a very expensive failure, and they went back to the regular telegraph. But there's something missing from this picture here that we should have already figured out if we understand how things are moved in 1864. What's missing, very important in this picture, are the draft animals. Virtually nothing occurs or is achieved without the use of draft animals in 1864. So they're a very important part of history, I think kind of overlooked by a lot of people. Jeb Stewart is told by Lee to do the things that they typically do during the war. He's supposed to disrupt their supply lines, disrupt their communications, things like that. So he's doing what Lee tells him to do. So he goes up along the Orange and Alexandria Railroad. He goes to Burke, Virginia, and with 1,800 Confederate cavalry, he captures the station at Burke, Virginia. He captures it. So this is a station now being occupied by Union troops, Union Telegraph. He captures this station so rapidly they can't even get off the dots and dashes to say, hey, the Confederates are here. So they come in and take over. He has a telegraph operator with him named Shepard. And he has Shepard get on the line there and pretend to be a Union telegrapher for the next 5 hours. During that period of time, they are tearing up railroad tracks. They're capturing animals and supplies and wagons, things like that. They're doing that for the next 5 hours. And Shepard is getting received messages, but there's nothing of any great importance. There's no big announcement of a battle, that sort of thing. But one thing he notices after 5 hours of this, not one time did he get a message, hey, watch out for those rebels, they're in the area. They obviously have no idea the Confederates are at Burke at this point in time. Jeb Stewart has a sense of humor, and he has at the end of that period of time, he has Shepard, his telegrapher, send one last message, and the message goes to Quartermaster General Burke of the Union Army, telling him where they are, they're at Burke Station, and complaining about the condition of the captured mules that are just not up to Confederate standards at all. And he rides off into the sunset. And that would be the end, except there's one more thing that happens. After the war, during this whole time, Samuel Morse and Royal Earl House are in a big legal battle over patent rights. And what they're going to do after the war is over is they're going to mend their ways, stop fighting over the patent, and they're going to combine together to create the Great Western Telegraph Company. And everyone lived happily ever after. Thank you.